Welcome to Immigration Insider with your host, attorney John Nicelli. This podcast is an educational forum on how to deal with complex aspects of immigration and pitfalls to avoid. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, johnnicelli.com. Now here's the host of Immigration Insider, attorney John Nicelli.
Has anyone heard about getting a green card through marriage? Perhaps you've heard that's one of the easiest ways to become a resident of the United States if you have no status or you're visiting as a tourist. Well, part of that is true and part of it isn't true. My name is John Nicelli. I'm an immigration attorney here in New York City. I've been practicing about 40 years, and I have many, many years of experience dealing with people who got married basically to obtain their green cards. And of course, if your intent is only to get a green card and not to stay married, that's something that you should avoid at all costs. So let's speak about the basic procedure. So if a person is here lawfully, meaning that they entered as a tourist or some other non-immigrant type of visa, and they were legally in the United States, and they marry a U.S. citizen, they're going to generally be able to file for an application for adjustment of status. An adjustment of status would be based on immediate relative category because your wife is a U.S. citizen or your spouse is a U.S. citizen, whoever that spouse may be. Now, the issues that we run into is that, first of all, when you start a case, you have to realize that you're dealing with an agency with the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. That can often be quite difficult to deal with. So when you deal with them, you got to realize that every marriage is a fake marriage until proved otherwise. And the burden to prove otherwise is on you, the applicant, who's looking to obtain their residence in the United States. So one of the things that immigration is going to look at once you file an application is your marriage bona fide? When I say bona fide, that means that you live in marital union, you live together, you have a good relationship, and you do everything else that normal Americans would do, or anybody in a marital relationship, basically, as a husband and wife, or a wife and wife, or a spouse, or whatever it may be. So one of the things that immigration will look at, which is very important, is what documents do you have together? Do you have a lease together to an apartment? Do you have health insurance together? Do you have life insurance together? Do your job letters indicate that you have a spouse in case of an emergency to notify that spouse? Do you have credit card bills together, or credit card accounts? Do you have utility bills like a gas bill, electric bill, cell phone bills together, bank accounts together, and pictures on different occasions together? Now, many times I've told people to bring me pictures on different occasions, and they'll bring maybe 2 or 3 pictures. And that's not what immigration is looking for. Immigration is looking for experiences that you've had together. You went out to dinner with friends or family. You had a birthday party together. You had a graduation celebration together. Whatever you guys or women or whoever may have done together, that's what you need to show. You need to show that you live in marital union, you actually live in the same household, and you have documents that you share together. And another thing, one of the things they look at very closely is life insurance. Life insurance is often a very important document to obtain, even as for a low amount of money, because why would a person buy life insurance if they don't intend to live together? So that's usually very helpful in marital types of cases. So that's what I just explained to you is when people are in the United States. So let me explain to you another option. What if the spouse is not living in the United States, but yet you're married? So the American citizen may have gone to whatever country and married the spouse, and now you want to bring that spouse back to the United States. Well, you can't file as a tourist for a tourist visa because you're no longer a bona fide tourist, because now your intent is to be married to your spouse. So what if your spouse has never been to the United States, you met the spouse overseas, and you only know the spouse a very short time? and you fell madly in love after 2 or 3 months, and all of a sudden you decide you're going to get married, you want to bring a spouse here. Well, as I said before, immigration considers every marriage a fake marriage until proved otherwise. So the burden is you to prove that your marriage is bona fide. And the way you would do that is you would want to show, first of all, how many times did you visit your spouse before you got married? How long has your relationship lasted? Has it been for years, for months, for weeks, for days? They look at all those things. And what does your spouse do right now? Are they working? Do they have a good job? Are they very poor? The economic situation of a person is often considered, because many times people will pay somebody to get married just so they get out of the economic doldrums that they're in. And that's not something you want to get involved with, all right, for many, many reasons. So, but immigration will look at what kind of communications you've had, how many times you visited, have you met the person's family? Does the person have children? Have you contributed to anything with the children, whether their education or a soccer team, or what role have you played in that child's life or children's life? What role have you played in your new spouse's life? Have you done anything to enhance that person's life? What kind of communications have you had? Have you have cell phone messages together? Do you have text messages together? Do you have receipts that when you went to visit, you stayed at the hotel? Or if you stayed in your spouse's residence or apartment, do you have any kind of proof? Do you have statements from perhaps neighbors or relatives who may have seen you, or people, friends you may have visited? Things like that. What airline tickets you have to show that you went there. And very important is how many times you've actually visited a spouse and been physically present with the spouse. That's very, very critical. So basically, as I said, the more documents you have, the greater your chances of being approved. Now, there are some exceptions to the law, and an exception would be if your spouse was here and you got into a spousal relationship where one spouse started abusing the other spouse. And if you're looking for the benefit, obviously you can't be the abuser. So it'd be basically the American citizen or lawful permanent resident who you're married to may be the abuser. And if you can show that you've been a victim of battering or abuse, then those are things that you'd also want to bring into play, because there are ways you can obtain your residence without your spouse. But you'd have to show, one, you're probably either divorced or in the process of getting divorced, and you'd also have to show what have you done as far as being battered. Were you the cause of the battering? Are there any police reports against you? And if there aren't, that's good. But if the batterer, which is usually the American citizen, did that person, how did they batter you? Do you have any police reports? Do you have orders of protection? Have you ever called the police? Can you prove it otherwise if you have no police reports? Have you gone for psychological treatments? Are you on medication because of the trauma that you suffered? There's many, many things that you can do. But primarily, before you even get into the battering, immigrations want to see, well, before the battering started, which had to be some period of time during the time of your marriage, what joint documents do you have? What documents can you show that you actually lived with your spouse? That's critical, because if you have no documents and you say you've just been a victim of battering, that could be a little bit of a problem, because they may not believe that you actually were married, because, as I said, every marriage is a fake marriage until proved otherwise. So those are the very basics for what you would do to get at your alien card, your permanent residence, through an American citizen. There are other ways to obtain a residence through marriage, and that would be if you married a permanent resident, someone who has a green card. If you married someone who has a green card, that process is probably going to take much longer. All right. Most of the time, for the petition to be approved and to be current, where a visa becomes available to you, the processing times could be 3, 4, even 5 years or longer, depending on what country you're from. Because depending on the allocation of visas per country would depend on how long basically the waiting period is. If you're married to a permanent resident, generally, if you're unlawfully in the United States, you cannot adjust status as a person who legally entered the United States and marries a U.S. citizen. So if you marry lawful permanent residents, you probably have to go back overseas to be processed for your visa abroad. If you go overseas, you're more than likely subject to the 10-year bar. And the 10-year bar is that if you stayed in the United States for more than 1 year unlawfully, even if you entered as a tourist, if you entered unlawfully, then, and you're married to a resident, you would be subject to leaving the country, staying in your country for at least 10 years. But there is a waiver that you can file, and the waiver allows you to be forgiven for your unlawful presence during the last 10 years. If you only stayed 6 months illegally, or a little more than 6 months, rather, at least 6 months, then you'd only be barred for 3 years. But in that case, you would also have a waiver that would be available. The other issue that always comes up is how many entries do you have into the United States? If you're married to a resident or even married to a citizen, if you entered the United States unlawfully multiple times, that's a problem, because then you probably would be subject to the 10-year bar, and you would be stuck outside the country for 10 years before you can file to come back. All right, so that's the basics of obtaining a residence through your green card. If you try to attempt to get your residence through fraud, and immigration determines that the marriage was a fraud because you paid the person to marry you or had some arrangement, the penalty for doing that is, one, you'd probably be barred for life from ever getting a residence through any other means. So even if you had an American citizen child that was 21 years old and filed for you, you'd probably be barred from getting a residence through that child. You'd also be subject to criminal penalties, and the criminal penalties could be up to a $500,000 fine and up to 10 years in jail. I don't think anyone really wants to do that based for a marriage. It may be nice to legalize yourself, but certainly not the way to go, because you don't want to end your relationship in a jail cell. So with that, I would like to say that if anyone ever has any questions or needs any help regarding obtaining their residence through marriage or otherwise, we are here for many, many years. We are located at 225 Broadway, Suite 1040, New York, New York. Our telephone number is 212-227-8020. You can also check my website at johnnicelli.com. And however we can help, if we can, we will help. One thing I can guarantee you, we will always tell you the truth and never take your money for something that we can't do.
You've been tuning into Immigration Insider with your host, attorney John Nicelli. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, johnnicelli.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.